Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and start unscrewing a few things in order to get to the locks that we want to remove. First and simplest one is I'm going to go ahead and take off this trigger. And you can do that by simply unscrewing the one screw there that holds this in place and kind of teasing it out without losing the spring, and then sliding this trigger out. I will then put this screw with the trigger, and then I can get to this lock right here. Oop, there goes that spring. Well, quite literally, there goes that spring. But I'll take out this lock right here. I don't need it. I'm going to throw that aside. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unscrew this so that I can take out the whole bolt assembly here. Take out that screw. I do still save screws even if it's on locks or whatnot that I don't want, and sometimes I will save the springs if I think it's beefy enough. So I'm going to remove this, and you can see here how this looks. I'm going to remove also the priming, since it happened already, but I'm going to go ahead and remove the priming rod and indicator system. I'm going to set that over here with a trigger. Now I'm going to be able to slide this whole thing out. There we go. I'm going to be able to take this out. I'm going to set that aside for just a second. Okay, now we have a nice clean system here, and this is the rails that I was talking about that the bolt slide kind of rides on, as you can see here. Right? There's also this peg here that goes into this, so when we're putting things back together, there's a peg on one side of this plunger tube that goes right in that hole. You got to make sure that it goes in there. Okay, so that's really important. The rest of this, for the purposes of what you may normally doing as a basic modification, you would keep. But in what I want to do overall is going to be brassing the system. So I'm going to be removing the dart tooth as well. Now, let's talk about how this works for a second. So as you can see here, there's a block right here which prevents the darts from going out, which is fantastic when you don't actually have a barrel system, because then the dart is here in this position and it can't go forward, which means it can only be shoved back into the bolt. So that's kind of the nice feature of that. But when we do a brass breech, we're not going to need it, so we're going to take it off. When the bolt slide is pushing it forward, this thing will come down, and then now you've got a nice clean hole through the barrel, and the dart will fly through. But we're going to remove it, so let's get to that. Just what I think. There we go. Alright, there's that dart tooth. We don't need it, so we're going to set that aside. And now the shell is pretty much at the point of where we would like it. We're going to take off a few more things later on and do more stuff with it, but for this video, the first portion of this build log, this is all we're going to need to do to this. So we're going to set this one aside. And now take a look at this piece right here. So this is the whole assembly. This is your bolt sled, this is your bolt receiver, this inside is the bolt cap inside of the plunger tube, then there is the actual piston itself, which consists of the plunger head, the rod, the spring, and obviously the catch portion of that spring. Excuse me. Now this is a lock that we need to take off. There's a couple of ways to do it. If you're not intending to take this apart at all, which I am, what you can then do is just take some snips here, which I'm going to do right now anyway, just for simplicity's sake, and just cut, twist, and this is gone. And now it's a free and clean system there. But what I am going to do is I am going to cut this open so that I can get through the air restrictor and clean that out really nicely, and also do some work on the inside of this. First thing that we're going to need to do is take out the spring, and we can do that by carefully unscrewing this. So even though I'm going to be using my power tool here, I'm going to be doing it very slowly and holding this plate back. So this is the back plate of the plunger tube, I'm going to hold it back. Especially on higher spring loads, you want to hold that back and kind of unscrew this carefully. Now, I am holding it back pretty tightly, and this is on a low spring load, but if you were doing this on a higher spring load, I would recommend unscrewing a little bit, unscrewing a little bit, unscrewing a little bit, unscrewing a little bit, and then making sure everything comes off. Especially if you've got any kind of pre-compression, which this does not have in its stock form. So now this is the plunger head, the one O-ring, the screw that'll get this all off, the spring, which is not terrible. I mean, it's not good enough for anything we can use today, but it's not a terrible spring. It just needs a little more help than this. And then the back plate here. We're going to set that aside with its screws. It's pretty well lubricated still, actually. Now you can see the back plate there, and you can see that plate. Hold on, let me get the lights on again. See that back plate there. And that is the air restrictor. You can see the 3 prongs that I had. Now, what I did before getting any kind of Dremel or cutting it out is I would take a knife and I would quite literally just start to slice into these little pegs here and cut into them, and then start taking some snips and snipping into them until they came out and the whole thing just fell out the back. Absolutely doable, but that's not what we're doing today. Since we are also brassing this, I want this to be nice and clean cut through. In order to do that, I've got to take out this little post here. So let me grab my nail that I use for that. If I didn't mention that in the beginning, you also need something like this, like a nail. And if I didn't mention this in the beginning, you also need something to kind of put this onto, which I will do this way with my clamp. You're not actually clamping anything, you just kind of want to have it bridge. You can also use like the edge of a desk or whatnot, but I'm going to do it this way. And I think you'll be able to see it better on camera. So I'm going to do it this way. Hold it, and then grab my hammer and just start tapping. There you go. And then I can just pull the pin out. Oop, don't need that. There you go. Now I've got the pin out. I'm going to make sure that's safe and put it over here. Now with the pin out, this whole thing pops right off. I got my whole bolt sled, and I can choose at this moment to cut this off or not. Probably will, but let's just leave it there for now. And now we have this. Now if you notice, this knob won't allow us to actually get anywhere. So what we're going to have to do next is make a cut. This is where the pipe cutters will come in. And I'm going to cut, depending on what kind. Now this really depends on how you want to cut this. Really depends on what kind of mod you want to do. If you're talking about an angel breech, you're going to want to cut right about where this air hole is. What we're specifically doing here is a different kind of breech, and I'll talk about that in the next video. But it will be a brass breech, and we're going to go ahead and cut right at the line here. Now in some blasters it's going to be all orange. So you're just going to have to find out where that seam line is, because there still will be a seam line. And this older blaster, you can see that it's black and orange. So we're going to line up our pipe cutters here. And in both cases, you can see right there, it's lined up on that seam. We're going to do this very slowly. Gosh, this is so well greased. I'm going to hold right here where there's no grease. I'm going to do this very slowly and start to cut. But not all the way through. Well, all the way through the first layer. You don't necessarily need to go all the way through. There we go. And just start to see if we can tease it. Nope, not yet. Tighten it a little bit more. And the reason I'm doing this way is because I'm going to be putting this back on with a breech system that I have in mind. If you can guess what that breech system is, leave it in the comment section below. But it is not my idea for the breech system, and I'll talk about that all in the next video. There we go. Okay. Now this is what I mean. A little bit piece of it that is not yet ready to go. And I'll show you why I don't necessarily want it to. There we go. There we go. Now this comes off. Right? And we can now pop this whole piece out. And this is where the air restrictor is housed. So this is the nice little bolt that we got nice and clean, as you can see there. And we'll set this aside, and we'll set the plunger tube aside. Now we need to get at this. Now I mentioned before that I've used my knife and my cutters to really just start to dig in here and start snipping away and whatnot. And you can absolutely do that. I'm going to do that perhaps to one of these. Right there, just like that. But you can also use Dremel. Let's see, actually, you know what? This isn't too bad. I'm going to use it this way. This is much faster than a Dremel, to be honest. But I will still use my Dremel, because I do want to have some clean lines here. There we go. Easy peasy. And now comes the back plate, the spring for the air restrictor, the air restrictor system itself, and now all you're left with is this peg, which, to be honest, doesn't really affect things, but we will be getting rid of it and the thing that holds it in place. So we're going to snap that off, kind of get at this. Bada bing. Alright, here we go. Okay. Alright, so now we've gotten rid of the air restrictor. We can throw all these little pieces away. So this is really good for using as a stir stick for epoxy that we will be using later. And so now we got this nice clean system. You put it back together, clean this off. You could put it back together and you got this nice straight shot right on through. And that's actually pretty much what you would need if you didn't want to brass it, and you could now epoxy this back together. So this is the reason why I wanted to show it to you this way. At this point, you could just epoxy this, stick it back here, seal up that hole, put it all back together. You've got a really nice and clean system for typical firing. But we are going to brass it, so we're going to do a little bit more with it, as I mentioned. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my hands. I've got a lot of grease on them. Okay, as I mentioned, that this, if this is all you wanted to do, you can go ahead and stop right here, put this all back together, and you'd be nice and dandy. But what I'm going to do is I am going to brass it, so I am going to be cutting this off, as I won't need it for the specific brass that I want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and put my glasses on, grab my Dremel, and then we are going to be cutting away at it. Okay, so I've gone ahead and cut that off. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean it up a little bit. There we go. Nice and cleaned. Doesn't need to be perfect right now, as I will be working on it some more, but just enough for me to get some brass through so I can do the next part of this. There. This is just some 9/16 brass. It's got a little bit of a gap in there. Let me grab. Okay. I went ahead and cleaned this out a little bit more, as I mentioned with, there we go. Clean this out a little bit more so that I can just slide this fairly tightly, but almost all the way through. There we go. If I grab this side and this side, there we go. So we can go all the way through. And the reason for that is because I want to be able to fill this up with some hot glue and then be able to kind of pull this back out. So I'm going to get my hot glue gun ready, but now you can see this kind of just slides right on through, which will be perfect for the next steps anyhow. And what we're going to go ahead and do is kind of grease this up, stick this back down in there, fill it with hot glue, and then when the hot glue kind of sets a little bit, pop this right back on out. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get my hot glue ready, and then when it's hot and ready to go, we'll go ahead and do that process. Okay, as you can see here, the hot glue has dried, sort of. I'm kind of moving this in and out to kind of continue to create that nice channel inside. Now, the first person I saw to do this method was Drac, which I thought was a pretty ingenious way of doing it. This is not the way I used to do it. When I saw him do it, I thought, wow, that's actually really clever. And it works really well. Just getting some lubed up brass and then letting this happen. Nice. So this is getting really solid all the way through. So now we've got this nice kind of clean barrel system. I can take this out now, and there we go. Dead space has been removed. I'm going to clean that up at the top here so we can make it nice and even. I'm going to use this to kind of melt it a little bit. And that's about it for this. There we go. Okay, so now that is solid. Okay. Put this aside. Put everything else aside. And kind of recap what we've done in this video. So we've kind of gutted out the internals of things that we do not need, which are all these locks that are all the way over there. We've taken this plunger tube. Oops, something fell through. Taken this plunger tube. We're not doing anything to this just yet. It'll probably be the last thing to add a new spring. So we've taken that, put it here. Oh, sorry, forgot one thing. That goes inside. There we go. And the breech, which will fit at some point, but not right now. And take this, put it all back together. So we're kind of just putting everything back in its place, sort of. Things that we will be looking into again in the future. I can put this pin back so I don't lose it. And the easiest way to put that pin back is to get it started and kind of roll it onto an edge. Now you've pushed it through. And we can stick this right back in there. Find that little knob. Stick that right back in its place. Let's get this screwed on. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and take some time to put everything together, and we'll kind of talk about it then. Okay, and we're back. So I've gone ahead and put everything back in its place that I am going to be keeping, at least for the time being. As you can see here, the plunger tube and assembly is all in place, the bolt sled, the breech, the trigger, keep forgetting about that, the catch spring, all of that is all in place here. The priming indicator I'm keeping The magazine release, obviously, I will be keeping. The dust cover or jam door, whatever you want to call it, is also going to be in place for the time being. And I'm not touching anything else on the external shell just yet, but we will be down the road. All of this stuff right here, I'm getting rid of. I don't need any of it. I will be keeping the screws, however, and perhaps a couple of the springs, but that's about it. The rest of this is going to all go in the trash. And that's all that we're going to take a look at. Now, in this position, if you've glued this all back together, you should have a really nice firing system. It'll fire probably a good 10 feet more than it used to. It's a much more clean and efficient system if you closed that off and glued this back on correctly. There shouldn't be anything else that you need to worry about. So that's all for this video. And again, this is going to be build log, so this is video 1 of a build log for a Project Blaster, and we will be going ahead and taking a look at the future. So I'll catch you guys in the next video. Hope you guys have a good night and Nerf on, everybody.